Welcome to week 4, day 16 of the fall 2025 Web Development Technologies course. I'm Jim Kaufman with Rankin Technical College. So first of all, I just want to commend everyone for your dedication and hard work. I know that this course can be course and program can be very demanding of your time, and a lot of this materials new to most of you. So I understand it takes a while to learn and get acclimated with everything. So I just want to commend everyone for working hard and sticking with it, and just you just need to keep pushing forward and stay persistent, and you will have success. I guarantee it. Some housekeeping items. Just kind of wanted to mention. Try to instead of waiting, until the weekend. Try to spread out your work throughout the week. I know some people, work a lot of hours, work full time, very busy. But if you can spend just a little bit of time on the other days, it's really going to help you out instead of trying to cram it all into the weekend. And you have other things maybe going on, or you're just tired from the work week. So the more you can kind of get a little bit done here and there during the week, it's really going to help you. So you don't have to get all stressed out on the weekends. Also wanted to, I know I've talked about it more than once. You probably get tired of it, but just kind of want to go through the directory structure again real quick. For basically two reasons, just to help both you and me as far as grading, and you as so you don't have to keep copying things all over the place when you don't have to, especially when you start getting multiple files. Let me pull that up real quick. So for your assignments, for the apply, analyze, extend, right? Just use the data files directory, HTML, CSS data files for each chapter. And then here's a case, and if for some reason a folder isn't there, just go ahead and create it. Basically means there's no data files for that, all right? So just use of those. And as far as the labs and your turn, we really don't want to do anything in here, but you may have to copy some images, right? So here for chapter 7, you have a bunch of images here for chapter 7. But do the apply, the extend, and analyze all there within the data files directory. And then in the exercises directory, we're not using chapters 1 through 12, but we are using U-turn for your dog grooming and your personal portfolio, because it's always building on what you did the previous chapter. So just kind of keep on adding to this, all right? And the same with the labs. So the labs, you have strike, accord, wild rescue, same thing. You just keep on adding to these. And obviously, like I mentioned, there's going to be some files you're going to have to copy over from your data files over, especially images and things like that. And, it's going to help you. It's going to help me for grading. It's going to help you just make things simpler for you. And I did want to also mention, and I know I mentioned this before, when you're working on a project with multiple team members, there's times that most of the time how it works is basically there's a process that comes and picks up all your files. So it's important to have them in a certain directory. So it's really good practice for that, to have those in the right directory. So that's how things get picked up, and that's how things get actually deployed into a production environment, right? You always develop, usually when you're working on a team, you're usually working locally, just like we are here. But when you deploy something, something goes to production, there's a process that comes and picks everything up and moves it. And so for everything to work right, it needs to be in the correct directory. So it's very good practice for that as well. Okay. All right. Did you want to mention that there's no hands-on test this week? And I don't think that there's going to be one next week either. So you probably shouldn't have to worry about that. I think the following week, though, we might have like a double one, a bigger one. But we'll deal with that when that time comes. Okay, I'm just going to do a quick week 3 review over 5 or 6 concepts, very quick here, and then we'll go ahead and do its chapter 7 lecture and demonstration. It'll be kind of a short day, short video overall. Tomorrow we're going to be doing chapter 8, which is forms and tables, a little more involved. All right. Let's get started on that. So as far as a review from chapter 5, chapter 6, what is responsive web design is a strategy for creating websites that adapt to different devices, ensuring an optimal viewing experience for users on everything from mobile phones to desktop computers. The goal of responsive design is to optimize a website for a wide range of devices using a single site rather than creating multiple versions of the same website. So some years ago, before how it used to work is because you can actually, on a server side, based on parameters that when you access a website, that can actually be, it can actually detect what kind of device you're using, and so how it used to work a long time ago is if you are using a mobile device, it would bring back a mobile-based website, right? If you were using a desktop computer, it would bring back a desktop website, right? And when I say a desktop website, I'm just talking about the CSS and HTML be optimized for desktop, or the CSS HTML be optimized for mobile. But with a responsive web design, you can have one website, and based on using the media queries and all of that, you can actually have it work on multiple different devices, right? So as I just said, this approach often involves a fluid layout with a responsive images and can grow and shrink in response to the viewport size. A mobile-first strategy is a key part of this approach, focusing on styling content for small mobile devices first, then adjusting that layout for larger screens. So more content, more websites are accessed by mobile devices than desktop devices. So it has, over the years, it's become much more prevalent that you would go ahead and build your website for a mobile device. Then you would make adjustments to that code so it would work on other tablets and then desktops as well, right? Key components of responsive design: media queries. So these allow you to apply different CSS styles based on the device's characteristics, based on size. Also, you can do other things as far as print. We looked at that, where you can actually print's a big one, especially if you've got a very busy website. You can have a special CSS just for print, so that it doesn't try to print everything out. Some pages are really busy and it's just not going to look good on print. So you can actually hide things, you can move things, you can change headings, whatever. So it looks a lot better in different situations, right? And the same thing with media queries for desktops. You may want to add additional things for a desktop that you don't have in a mobile, etc. Right? A breakpoint is a key component of the media query, and it's the point at which we want to apply different styles of a web page based on that viewport size, which we looked at that within Google, within the Chrome developer tools, where you get to a certain size and all of a sudden it changes, right? And obviously you can do the same on your just having the Chrome brought without developer tools. You'll see it change. But if you want to really see the exact breakpoint in size, then you can do that and you can actually see that, right? By using the developer tools. Mobile first strategy, kind of already discussed that. Dynamic pseudo classes. So pseudo classes are attached to a selector with a colon. So whenever you see a colon, you know that's a pseudo class, right? And it specifies a state or relation to the selector, giving you more control over element. It's used a lot for like links for just basically a link, and then you have a link visited if you're hovering over that, an active link. So it's very helpful for that. Because mobile and tablet devices are touch-based, pseudo classes like hover are more commonly used in desktop viewports, right? Hover is not going to do you any good on a mobile device, right? So you always think about the hover, think about mouse, right? You're hovering with a mouse. Whereas when you've got a tablet or a mobile phone, you're not hovering, right? Gradients. A gradient is a gradual transition from one color to another. And it's just mentioned here as a feature of CSS3. There's been different versions. I know it was mentioned in the book, CSS 1, 2, 3. It's really, and this with CSS3, there's a lot of things that you can do that back in CSS 1, you couldn't do all these things, right? To do some of the things that you've done already, it would take weeks to do some of that, days, I shouldn't say weeks maybe, but multiple days just to do some simple little things sometimes, right? Whereas with these later versions like CSS3, you can do they didn't have all these transitions and these gradients and, making things easier for different devices and so forth, right? So there are two types of gradients. There's the linear gradients, and that transitions in a straight line, such as from top to bottom or diagonally, okay? Radial gradients begin with a color in the center and transition outward. Okay, mobile-friendly testing. After completing a design for a mobile viewport, it's a good idea to practice to test it in many different devices as possible. Tools like Google and Bing's are, I don't know, I should say Bing's here. But Google and Edge, I would say Edge, it probably shouldn't be Bing's here. Edge, it has, the developer tools, right? Mobile-friendly test checkers, so you can determine if your website is optimized for mobile viewing. Okay, here's just basically a glossary of what we just all spoke about. Always remember, viewport is the user's visible area of a web page, which is often used in place of the term window, right? The viewport's what you see, but in reality, and we'll see this when we talk about JavaScript, the Windows actually has its own properties, okay? And that might not make sense right now, but you'll see that when we start working on JavaScript. There's some properties that belong to the window object. In a browser, there's a window object. And the viewport is really kind of part of that. It's kind of the inner part of that window, okay? But from this perspective, it's just basically saying your viewport's the visible area of a web page, also using terms your window that you're looking at, right? Okay. So we're done with that one. Let's talk about Chapter 7 here a little bit. Chapter 7 is about improving your web design with new page layouts. So it's essential to continually update a site to keep your audience engaged and customer satisfied. And this chapter project that focuses on enhancing a website using the Chapter 5 semantic elements. We're not going to be doing the specific project that's in the chapter, but you could, and you should probably follow along with that for practice's sake. And as a quick reminder, the purpose of semantic elements, we've already kind of learned those. There's like the header, nav, main, footer, and we're going to be expanding on that, okay? Semantic elements are part of creating a well-structured and meaningful web page. Years ago, for all of these different items, so here's some new ones we're going to be kind of talking about. Years ago, all you used was divs. Divs everywhere. Div for everything. Div here, div there. And now, and divs don't have semantic meaning. A div can be anything. Just a area on your page. It doesn't have any specific meaning. Or all these other semantic tags, header, nav, main, footer, they all mean something, right? We know the footer's at the bottom. We know the header's towards the top. Nav can be in different places, but we know nav is navigation, right? Main kind of is the main part of your whole page, right? Usually the main is going to stretch, a big part of your page, right? So a new one we're going to kind of talk about here a little bit. And, I think we've seen this a little bit maybe, but already. But the article element is used to note a self-contained content, such as a news story or a blog post. An article can be nested within other HTML elements like main, section, or another article. The aside element is for content that is tangentially related to the content around it, often displayed as a sidebar. The section element is a thematic grouping of content, typically with a heading. The figure element is used for self-contained visuals, such as photos, diagrams, illustrations, and code snippets. And the fig caption element provides a caption for the figure. So always remember your fig caption needs to be within your begin and end figure tag. Okay. Improving design with CSS. Cascading style sheets is crucial for improving the look and layout of your website. Some new features and technologies as part of CSS that we're going to kind of go over here a little bit today is the CSS grid layout. And this is a modern web page design for creating a single or multiple column layouts. It gives web developers more accurate control over layouts than older methods. Remember, we already did a little bit of the float left, float right, clear properties in that. Grid layout is going to give you a little more control over things. So we're going to take a look at that. Opacity. So opacity, this property controls the transparency of an element. An opacity value of 0.50 makes the element 50% transparent, while the value 0 makes it completely transparent. Remember that any nested elements will inherit this transparency. So if you have a div and you're using opacity on that div, okay, of 50%, and then you have other tags within that div, right? Maybe divs within divs or whatever. All those child elements will inherit from that parent element that has that opacity set, right? We'll look at box sizing properties. So this is a CSS property. It's used to describe how the overall size of an element is calculated. So just because you stated that some certain box on your page is 300 pixels, say 300 pixels by 300 pixels, well, you're saying that box, but there's actually more to that, right? There's other elements as well that make up the total size of that, and we're going to take a look at that. Shadow properties. There's a box shadow property, and it applies to shadows to an element like a div or an image. And there's also text shadow property, applies to a shadow specifically to the text. Okay. And we'll also take a look at some favicons. And favicons are the little small images that appear in the browser tab. So up here, this is a Google Doc, so we're not really seeing that here. Well, it does. Yeah, this is a favicon they use, right? I shouldn't say that they don't, but yeah, this is. Obviously, when you like do a new tab, you can see that this is just the Chrome default. You know, anytime if you don't set a favicon, like a lot of, like the things we've done so far, you're always going to see just the default one, right? Unless you go ahead and use favicons, right? Little icon images. For the W3C, they have this little W here, right? This little W here, right? W with the 3, right? So that's how, that is a favicon. All right. All right, so let's look at some code for these. And since we're already here, let's go ahead and look at, I think we can. Sometimes it works out. Depends on how complicated, some of these web pages are complicated in the way they kind of have their source. But, you come out here, you got to find a blank space. You can't do this on an image or something like that. But somewhere out in the middle of a page somewhere and click View Page Source. Okay? It will show you the source of the page. And as you can see here, we've got these links, these icon. Well, it has this icon link. Here's your icon links. And these are all used depending on what will work best for the device you have. Okay? And Apple has a special one here, Apple Touch icon, right? And so, and you can, when you view source of a page like this, you usually, especially you see something underlined here, it's a link, you can actually click on this and it'll go to so here's that icon, right? I'm going to close that. So you could actually look at each one. The Apple Touch one, much bigger there. Okay. Here, you can already know what the sizes of this is. It's going to be 32 by 32. Right? I'm going to come here and click this 16 by 16, much smaller, right? So these are the different favicons, right? You're not really viewing this on the page. This is going to be put right up here in your tab, right? It's just, this is how this is set up. When you put these here, okay, when you put them there, they don't automatically always show up. They're going to show up only based on certain devices, right? Only based on certain devices. Okay, so let's look at a little bit of code here. So here's just a simple little photography portfolio. And let's just take a look at this. Capture moments, photography, and we're using a figure here with the figure caption. It's just some basic navigation, doesn't really point to anything. Here's where we're using a little bit of grid elements. Okay, we're using grid. Okay, just kind of a basic page where we're just going to look at a few things in here. If you notice, I went ahead, and this isn't actually probably need to get for this one, obviously, probably a camera or something for photography would be a good thing to use. I just went ahead and grabbed the icons that were kind of for the first assignment for Chapter 7, the apply. And just to show you what I grabbed for this real quick here. Bear with me for a second. So all I did was for my little website there, for that little web page, is I went out here and for now just instead of creating one, and I could show you how to create a fav icon. I don't think I'll do that right now here. I don't think the chapter actually asked you to do that. But here's let's see, Chapter 7, images. So here's these images, and this is what I actually grabbed. I grabbed all three of these images. Okay, I grabbed all three of these images and copied those into my folder where I did that little photography web page. Okay, and so that is what that is using. And we go take a look at that. So, and then you go ahead and use the link. And here, what you're going to do is this is going to be an icon, right? As opposed to here you use a style sheet, but for these icons, this is how you have to do this. You do a basic icon. Here you need to do an Apple Touch icon, okay? And here you do this is called a shortcut icon, okay? So that's for each one of those. This is for Android and Chrome, a little shortcut. And so this is when and also when you bookmark a page in that, it will also put that in there as well, okay? Let me just actually do this real quick. If I bookmark this is going to put this in this folder right there. I'm going to say done. If I come back in here, I have folders for a lot of things. That's how I kind of do some bookmarks. So I went ahead and clicked that. It actually is putting this in here. And if you come down here, you can see the CSS here. So it'll actually, so all of these where you see a little icon, right? This is the GitHub, right? This is the GitHub icon. I'm sure you've seen that one before. This is Rankins. This is Rankins. Here, whatever I was looking at here, this is like the default one, right? It didn't have one, right? So it just uses the default one. But for ours, I went ahead and, like I said, I grabbed those little CSS icons for that Chapter 7 apply assignment. And that's what I put in my code there, and that's what it's using. So if I get rid of those, I just have a little default icon like up here, right? This 1/3 from the bottom. Okay. So the next thing I want to look at here. So let's look at figure. Okay, so this is how you do a figure. So you got your basically begin and then figure tag. And here you would include an image or a graphic. Could be a lot of different things. But it's basically just a way to kind of keep things together for an image. You know, usually when you have an image, you know, it's probably best to have some kind of a heading with that, right? Some kind of well, I'd actually put it below it, not necessarily a heading, right? But you put a caption, right? A fig caption. So in this case, let's pull this thing back up. Here's your fig caption. Professional photographer, ready for your special moments, right? Okay. So it kind of keeps it all together, right? Let's go look at, let me see here what I got. So here's a figure. Same thing here. This is figure showing this. Got an image and you got your fig caption. And like I said, always remember your fig caption is going to be within your figure tag. You don't want that outside your figure tag. Keep it inside your figure tag. You try yourself, take a look. You know, this is not much. You know, it's pretty simple here. Obviously, you can, here you're doing some special styling on this, so you can style this. You can style this caption. In this case, you know, you're making background black, color white of the text, italicized. You make it italic, right? A little bit of padding around it, all right? You put a little padding around. If you don't put padding, it's going to, if you don't put any padding here, let's take a look at it. Going look a little different. Actually, I don't see it being a lot different there, but I probably didn't notice as much. That should be significantly more. Yeah, you know, a little more padding is always nice. You're centering it, right? You know, there I'm left, right? Obviously, centers would be better for something like that. So Here the figure is using a margin of auto, right? Helps with centering that. All right, so that's a figure and figure caption. Not a lot there. Different things can be used for a figure. Like I said, besides just an image, it could be some other kind of graphic as well. Okay. All right. So here's the favicon stuff. This is just kind of showing the different formats, what's supported, and for all in ICO. An ICO is basically an icon. It's called. That's what it was. Traditionally, you always use ICO for your icon extension, right? But as time's gone on, they use other ones as well. Okay. I don't know if there's anything here. I don't want to. The reason to spend too much time on this. All right, let's get rid of that. Okay, so we looked at our favicon. We took a look at our favicon, our figure. Okay, and now here is an example of an article, and this article has multiple sections. And I guess I can just bring up the website over here on the left-hand side. So here's our article. Our article's a grid, okay? A grid, and it's made up of multiple sections. Here you got wedding photography. Then you have portrait sessions. Event photography, etc. Right? So your article's made up of multiple sections. That's common for an article as well. That. Let me clean this up a little bit. All right. Grid. So let's look at the grid here a little bit. And for this, we actually, the way this one was set up, it didn't do the normal. It didn't do a kind of a base grid within the CSS. It just did it within the media things where you have a grid. So for a grid, if you want to use a grid, what you do is you need to do display grid. So we've looked at different kinds of displays, right? We've seen a display block. Remember, we do a display block. We've done a display inline. Remember, we did inline block. We've seen a display none. If you do a display none on, it won't show it on the page at all, right? And also, grid's another one. We'll see there's other ones besides that as well. There's Flex. We're going to look at Flexbox next week a little bit. And so that's another one. But this week, we're kind of looking at display grid here, right? So in this case, we're doing we got columns. We got two different columns, and this will change based on size and that, right? So if this is a minimum of 650 viewport, you're doing this, right? If you've got the max, you're doing 4 columns. You got 4 columns if you got a very big desktop viewport. This is using a max width. This is something I probably didn't point out too much before. You kind of got to really be cognizant and pay attention. Min width is basically when the minimum width gets to, right, 1024, then this executes. Right? On here, it's saying max. So this is basically 0, which isn't really relevant. It's not real, right? You can't have a width of 0, but basically all the way up until 649, it will use this, right? It will use this all the way up to 649, right? After that, it's going to go to the next one, right, in the list. So 650 would be the next one. So this is what you would see that. And then here's what you would see for the desktop, which one's the next one after that. So in here, it's basically not doing a grid at all, right? So the smallest one is just using the default, which is just stacked one on top of another, okay? Then if it gets a little bigger, now we're not doing this one, we're doing this one, right? So let's go ahead and just for the heck of it here, let's do, how many rows? We got 2 rows. It helps when you have a lot of elements. So I wanted to demonstrate something, but it helps when you have a lot of elements, and so I'm going to show you somewhere else where we could do that. Grid gap. So here's our grid gap. So for a grid, we didn't, you only did a few different things here to get the grid to work. Basically display grid. Then you need to pretty much do some kind of a template columns. They also have template rows, but you kind of have to define that as well. Then there's this grid gap, right? And this is the gap here. So in this case, we change this to 10 just to see it work. And you can see how that changed over there. We can make it a 50 here, so you can see it changed there, right? Put it back to a 25. Okay, so just kind of want to point out how this was kind of set up for this page. Like I said, by default, there's just in the basic CSS, there's not any grid defined up here. It's only within the media queries based on screen size, right? And for the smallest one, it's not even using grid at all. It's just going to stack them right on top of each other, right? It's going to stack them right on top of each other. Once it gets a little bigger, then we start using a grid, right? And here we're basically using 2 columns. And then if we want to do 4 columns, right, then we go ahead and do it like this, okay? In this case, you got a little bigger gap here, like the other one was 25 on your gap. Here's a little more gap. It's a bigger desktop screen, so you're spacing things out a little bit more, right? Okay. Let's look at this grid here. Let me see here. So basically here you've got once again, so in this case you've got a class called container, right? Got a dot here, so it's class. Calling the grid columns. And just for a basic page, for a basic grid, that's really kind of all you need. Here you can use also autos, another. Auto's just going to kind of, automatically adjust, right? But let's look at changing that up a little bit. So here it's got 3 columns on the right. You see the 3 columns. So let's just do a 1 FR. It helps if I put a 1 there. And then here let's do a 3. And then here let's do another 1. And I'm gonna hit run. I have a bad habit of hitting, because I'm always, like I mentioned before, I always like save things. I'm getting a habit of hitting Control S to save something. That doesn't work on this. You just got to put it in here and click run. So here, the first column is 1, right? The second column is 3, and the third one is 1. Okay, so that's something else you can do to kind of change that as well. Okay. So you got 8 items here. What we can do on this is, let's just put this back to, let's put this back to auto. Here we can do, so right now we got what? How many rows? We got 3 rows. Let's do, let me change this to rows. I think this should work. Let's see here. Run. Okay. Auto. Kind of depends on other things. One thing can affect the other. So in this case, you've got 2 columns, right? 2 columns, and you got 4 rows, right? You want to change this and hit run. Yeah, it's just going to put it all in one column, right? And it's kind of actually, since you're restricting it to 1, it's never really going to execute this like you, okay? But because you're already kind of stuck with that, right? So if we do, let's see what happens with this. So in this case, let's see, well, it's automatically, so you have to realize that however you define it here, it's going to first do that. So in this case, you got 4 columns, so only 4 of these would fit, and it's automatically going to go to the next row. So here you got 2 rows, even though you only kind of defined 1, right? Now here, we do this, and I hit run. Here, you got 2 columns. It's based on how it's going to work. Like the first one's column, you're going to automatically have 2, right? So it has to, for all 8 of these to fit, right, it's going to have to go on multiple rows, even though you only defined 1 here, right? So keep that in mind. Okay. Is there anything else I wanted to talk about on that? Let's look at, I think I have some other code for that as well. So here I got basically a div. Okay. My class is grid container. And I have multiple grid items. Each one's, just a number here, right? And if we look at the CSS, so just to kind of review what we kind of already talked about, to create a grid, you need to do display grid. This is the most important part. It turns the container into a grid. Here we're doing grid template columns 1, 1, and 3. So this is going to be, this third one is 3 times bigger than the first and the second one. Okay. Here we're doing a grid gap of 20 pixels. So these are things you can just play around with. I saved that, made it much more. There you go. Just kind of review what we already kind of looked at. So basically you can do that. So just play around with it. That's the best thing to do. A lot you can do with just a few lines of CSS code. Basically just by doing display grid and doing the template columns and a gap. This used to have to kind of program this used to have to write a lot of code to make this work and float it to the left and right, and it was very cumbersome. Now it's much easier with later versions of CSS. Okay, what else do I want to show you here? I think we need to look at that box model a little bit. So if you've got a div, you put a div on your thing and you say, I want the width to be 300 and the height to be 100, or, here's one with 300 and 100. So you would think, well, what is my width and what is my height? Well, it's 300 by 100. Well, there's a little more to that because there's other things that because of the box model, right? And when you size a box like that, it's actually more than that. So to actually get the width of an element, it's going to be the width plus the padding plus the border. Okay? And actually, let me see if this will work for me. Let me see if I can inspect this item. So in this case, as you can see, there's the 300 by 100, right? Then you got padding of 50. Then you got this border of 0.8. So really, the width of this item, right, of this box is all of that added together. So for height, we're going up here, right? So well, it's 300's the width. We probably should go left to right here. 300's the width. 300 plus 50 plus 0.8, right? That's going to be your width. And then for your height, it's going to be 100 plus 50 plus 0.8. So this box is actually taking up that much space as opposed to, just the size that you give it when you created it. Okay. And actually, we'll probably just do it yourself here and show you. Developer Tools really helps with that, really visualizing the border and the padding and the margin, all of that. It's a very good tool. Once you kind of get used to that, I know it's a lot, especially early on here when you're just learning, but the more you work with those developer tools, the better you're going to be able to better you're going to be able to do your coding, and also being able to fix things, to debug things when things go wrong. I guess there really isn't much here. That's this. I just got the boxes. It really helped with going and looking at developer tools. But just stating that your width is more than just what you defined here. It also includes padding and border, right? And in this case, that div 1 is 300 pixels by 100 pixels. So you also have a border as well. Whereas here, and this is the one we kind of looked at, you got your 300 width, 100 height, and then we got your 50 pixel on padding, and then your border as well. So all of that together, your 50, your padding of 50 plus your border on top of that's going to make that a bigger box than just what you just defined as your width and height on that. All right. Wanted that a little longer than I really needed to, but that's okay. Let's see, what else? Was there something else we really wanted to look at here? So we looked at our favicon. Okay. Looked at our box. Let's look at shadow. Let's look at shadows and opacity. Okay. All right. Get rid of some of that stuff. So here is a box shadow. And the easiest way is just use box shadow, right? 10 pixels by 10 pixels. Okay. You can try this yourself, play around with it. Um, so there's 10 by 10, right? Make it more, make it less. So there's a little bit more. Um, just play around with different things. In this case, you know, the background colors, your coral. By default, your shadow is going to be black unless you state it otherwise, right? Let's go back to this. Specify color. This is showing light blue. And go take a look at that one. Here you get, now you're using light blue, right? Everything else remains the same. Here's a blur effect. And so your third parameter here, the first one was your bottom and your right, but the third one is actually a blur. So we can go ahead and look at that on this one. Now it's kind of blurred as opposed to how it looked before. And the fourth one is the radius. Okay. And as you can see, it's a little different, right? So 12 radius, you can make it a different size. These are things that are just nice. You can come out and play with. You can see what you like, what you don't like, what looks best on your page, right? That'll barely make it look much at all. So that is the box shadow. What else do we have here? Let's look at helps I can type there. Text shadow property. So here, let's go ahead and look at this. We've got an H1 tag. We're doing a text shadow. 2 pixels, 2 pixels, and here's the color. So there's a text shadow on that. Let's see what else it shows. I don't know if it's gonna. So here, text shadow with a blur effect. Okay. Here's the different things you can do. You can do a H shadow, a position of the horizontal shadow. Negative values are allowed. V shadow is the position of the vertical shadow. So you have first the horizontal, then the vertical. You can have a optional blur radius. By default, it's a 0. Optionally, you could have a color as well. Okay. So it looks at this. This is a blur effect. A little different than what we've seen before. Text shadow on a white text. Okay. And here's like a neon glow. Red blue neon glow. So just play around with that. It's a good tool, W3 Schools, to use just to try some things out, you know, play with some things, especially you got a little bit of code. Sometimes when you get too much stuff going on, especially some of these pages, you start having a lot of CSS and a lot of stuff, and one thing impacts another, and sometimes it just makes things easier. And come out here and you just play with some simple little things and get it to work and then go from there. I would suggest with the text shadows, you don't get too carried away with them. They sometimes look different depending on what kind of device you're using in that. And it isn't, subtle is better than, going to the extreme where you're trying to do something with, some crazy intense shadowing. Just a little bit of shadow makes things look a lot better than trying, going too extreme with that. So subtle's better, I think. All right, let's see what else we have here. So we looked at the text shadow property, the box shadow property, box sizing, all right, opacity. So let's look at opacity here too. Guess we'll just go with that one there. So here's a div, and you got opacity of 0.5. Let's take a look at it. So let's just make this 0 so we can see the difference. Over here on the right, 0's gone, right? 1.0. Let's do 1.0. Run. Let's do 0.5. That's kind of what we started with. So, a little bit of, a little bit of transparency, right? So always remember, start at 0. 0 is completely transparent, right? So let's just look at this. So here's showing different opacity. So here's 0.2, right? Here's 0.5, and here's 1. By default, it's always 1. So this is really no transparency. 0 is completely transparent. 1 is the default of transparency by for everything, right? So you can play around with that, change the numbers a little bit, depending on what what looks good. What looks good, right? You kind of want to test it in different browser sizes. Well, probably for that, it's not a big deal. Probably be pretty consistent when you use the developer tools. Maybe on a real device situation, I don't know. It kind of depends on settings too. Specific settings on different devices as well. But you try these different opacities on the different ones and see what looks good for you, your purposes, right? Okay. So I think we pretty much covered everything here. So that's all I have for today. Please let me know if you have any questions. I think I will go ahead and do maybe a little bit more. The grid layout, the grid stuff, really, they didn't, on the book, they really didn't cover a lot. I'm going to do and I think actually I was mentioning this, I was going to do it last week, but once I realized they really didn't go into any details till this week. But I'm going to go ahead and create a separate little video on grids, just to help you understand a few more different concepts on that. Because the book really doesn't cover a lot, so I'm going to just do a separate video. It's probably not going to be necessary for your assignments, but just for your own background knowledge. But just another option there on that. Next week we're going to be doing some other display options. We'll be doing the Flexbox stuff and doing some Bootstrap stuff. So be a lot more interesting next week in that area. So that's all I have. And please let me know if you have any questions, and have a good day.